Hey, everybody. Welcome to a lectionary psalm reflection, which is our Wednesday meditation. Pastor Stefan, myself, and Cameron is not feeling well.
Boo. Feel better, Cameron?
Yeah, he's at home with a fever, but he does not have COVID,
No.
which is good news. He did get a rapid test and it came back negative. He's waiting on a more accurate test, but there's a good chance he does not have COVID. He just got the flu, apparently.
Poor
So
guy.
our prayers and thoughts are with Cameron. Get better soon. And Stefan and I, we carry on.
We do.
We forge ahead.
Yeah. Nothing can hold us back unless we had the flu.
That's right. So, I mean, normally one of the gifts of this, the recording and the reflection, is Cameron's musical interpretation of whatever psalm we're reflecting on for the day. So,
Right.
in past episodes, what we often do is we'll link a couple YouTube videos in the show notes. So, if you want to see Psalm 19 uh, set to music, then look at those links underneath, and you can click on those if you want.
Sounds good.
So, Stefan, you read Psalm 19. I'll open up with some reflections. You chime in, and we promise not to drag this out too long.
All right. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is deprived of its warmth. The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The decrees of the Lord are firm, and all of them are righteous. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can discern their own errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then I will be blameless, innocent of great transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
Thank you, Stefan.
Hmm?
I like this psalm.
Yeah, it's a great song.
Um, it's quite memorable. If you are familiar with psalms, then this one might stick out to you. It gets used in a lot of different settings. In fact, I was just thinking about this. We used the first chunk of Psalm 19 just recently in our worship orders during the season of Epiphany. It was our call to worship.
It was for quite a while.
Yep, for a
We've had a
solid,
lot of Psalm 19.
yeah, for a solid 6 or 7 weeks, I think Psalm 19 called us to worship.
Mm-hmm.
So if that sounds familiar, then thanks for paying attention to worship. Um, I, so I have this sign behind me, and if you're listening to this on the podcast version, it simply says two books. And that's one way to think about Psalm 19. Um, there's two, so God reveals himself. That's God's self-disclosure. So God has this desire to be known, to be in relationship, and so God reveals himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he does that through what might be thought of as two different books. The second book we are familiar with. It is called the Bible. It's called Scripture. And we might call that special revelation. So, in and through the various biblical authors, in conjunction with the Spirit, they write down prophecies and laws and stories and narratives and poems. It comes out in different genres,
Hmm.
but it's God's revealing of himself through the scriptures. So we might say the scriptures are inspired and they speak of God's character. They speak of who God is. Not only
Hmm.
who God is, but who God is and who we are in relation to God and God's world. Yeah. So that's one of the books. And that book has not been around that long, if we think about it. The Bible has not been around for very long in terms of the history of the universe. We might say that the Bible has shown up in kind of the last microsecond of history,
Hmm.
and especially a written Bible that we have access to. So in the 1500s, with the invention of the printing press, um, people started having access to their own personal Bibles. But for a long time, the written scriptures were on scrolls and they were housed in certain locations, synagogues. And so we read that when Jesus was reading from, for instance, the roll of Isaiah, he would go to the synagogue and there was a scroll that he would read from. And so people would gather to hear from these sacred scrolls or sacred scriptures. So, special revelation, what we might call the scriptures, are a gift. And we learn a whole lot about God and who God is from those special scriptures, but they have not been around that long. There's another book that also speaks of who God is, and we might call that book the book of creation. That we learn something about who God is through a much, much older book. In fact, you could say that book is, we now think, 13 billion years old, starting with the Big Bang. And and that's what Psalm 19 is starting with the older book of creation
Hmm.
and saying that the psalmist says, when I look at the heavens, when I look at the cosmos, when I look at the stars and the planets and the sun, they say something about who God is. Even more so, the kind of the cosmos and the orderliness of like the orbits and all that stuff, they testify to who God is. So not only
Hmm.
do they silently kind of, circle around the heavens and point to kind of a divine power, they also witness or testify. So you might think of, today I'm looking at the sky, it's blue. You might think of this blue sky as giving a testimony and speaking about God's power and God's greatness. But then the psalmist in the second half, so you might think the psalmist focuses on the older book of creation, God's revelation in and through creation, as the first book. But then the psalmist in the second half of the psalm um, talks about the second book, which is the Torah and the law given at Mount Sinai. If you want to kind of think about the Torah in maybe a more narrow way, as simply the law,
Hmm.
the laws of God. And the psalmist draws a connection between the first half and the second half and saying these two books are connected and they are both speaking about God's greatness and God's goodness. So I could say more, and I might even say more, but I've been talking a lot. Stefan, hit it.
All right. Yeah, you laid out well, Sam. It's There's some who have thought, oh, maybe this is two different psalms, right? Because it hits one theme really hard and then another theme really hard. But I think that's just wrong because I think the whole idea is that there's these two things and they are meant to be compared and contrasted and laid on top of each other. I love Psalm 19, one of my favorites. Um, what I really like about it is that it implies that sometimes no things should be said at all, that sometimes things should just be seen and taken in and experienced. So, with the first few verses, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. The implication there is that, like you don't have to sometimes. You don't have to declare those things. The skies will do it for you, the sun will do it for you. I remember seeing a painting I think I was in college, and the painting was of this landscape, and then painted across the top of the landscape were the words, "The heavens declare the glory of God." And I thought, like that was such a mistake because the whole point was like you don't have to say that. Like they do that themselves. The whole point is you don't have to mention that. You don't have to quote that verse. You just take in what's out there. And I think that's a really powerful idea theologically and spiritually because the natural world and our natural experiences just have so much to teach us about God. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to slap a Bible verse on something in order to make it holy. We have to Christianize something or baptize something in order to, somehow make it seem like it's palatable for the church or for Christians or for just discipleship or whatever. And I think the whole point of the first half of Psalm 19 is you don't have to do that. Mm. That we walk around in one of the books of God. And when we interact with people and when we embrace cultures and when we walk through the woods and everything else, we're inescapably in one of the books of God. And I find that to be a very gracious and helpful idea for me because Psalm 39 or 139 talks about, if I make my bed in the depths, if I go over here, if I run up there, where can I escape? And like you can't escape. The heavens are always declaring the glory of God. God is always speaking to us. And I just find that to be really, really helpful. Mm. And then I found this quote from, I was going to say this first. C.S. Lewis said this was the greatest poem in the Psalter, which I found interesting. And he said some of the greatest lyrics in the world. How about that? And then this quote from Immanuel Kant. And he says, two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the starry heavens above and the moral law within. And so this comes from a little bit more of a secular perspective, but I appreciate the way that he brings them together. That he's like, there are two remarkable things in the world. The one is everything above us, and the other is this strange spiritual stuff that is within us. And the way that God speaks to us through our consciences, through our minds, and like you were saying earlier, more explicitly through the Torah or through his word, through the law.
That was
Thanks. What do you think Cameron would say?
He wouldn't say anything. He'd sing.
He would sing.
I did find this quote that I thought was interesting. It says, "We receive God's law as a gift." Because some people might think, well, the law is this restrictive list of things that we cannot do.
Yeah.
But I found this really helpful. I don't think of the law that way, and the commentator I read also doesn't. It says, "Receive God's law as a gift." It says, "God gives the law not because people are bad, but because God is good. And the law is an extension of his care."
Mm. Yeah.
Which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the psalmist is super. Is it David? Yeah. Well, it's at least attributed to him. The psalmist really likes the law. Like it makes him super happy.
Yeah.
And he likes to think about it, and it directs him, and it's like food for him, and it's like gold for him.
Like honey, sweeter than honey.
Yeah. And that's really that's a rich perspective. That the Reformed tradition has had for quite a while. That like, hey, God's law is really good news for us. It directs us.
Yes.
It shows us how to make the most of what we got. Mm-hmm. So pay attention.
Yeah.
Pay attention, Sam.
I'm paying attention with these eyes. Looking up towards the heavens.
There you go. Did you find some songs to link?
I thought I would know, but I think I'll just sing them instead.
Oh.
I think that would be beautiful.
It's too bad that Cameron's not here because this is a super
like
singable musical psalm.
Yes. Nope. I'll find some good some versions online, and we'll
Cool.
link those down below. So look for those. But in the past, this is one of the psalms that I've memorized.
Ah,
So for me, it's in my heart. And I always get confused because I memorized an old NIV translation of it, and so they've changed words since like
yeah.
2010 or whenever they did the new. That always throws me. I never know what to do with that. Do you ever have that
I
problem?
Oh yeah, totally. I Because some memorization I've done was in a non-NIV version, and yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I noticed during Epiphany when you were reading the call to worship, and this was the call to worship very often. I noticed you had to be like really particular about saying the right thing because it was written in your heart a different way,
Was.
right? Yeah.
I can't remember the way I memorize it. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their
Hmm.
voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world.
Hmm.
And here they switched it around where they said, they have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them.
And
Yet
that's a little.
voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. It's just like the phrasing is different. It's saying the same
Mhm.
thing, but just the
Mhm.
phrasing is different and the pacing is different.
Mhm.
And when you're memorizing, so much of that is like the pacing and the words and the rhythm of the language. And so when you read it in a different translation, it's like I have this inner fight where it's like I memorized it one way and yet I'm reading from a slightly different version. It just creates all this chaos inside.
For study, that can be helpful, where it's like, oh, that's a different word. That's a different way to look at it. For study, that can be helpful, but it trips you up when you're trying to just say the thing.
It does. I don't know what to do about that. Help me.
Help you.
Did I
I
rememorize it?
think. What's that?
Did I rememorize it with the new version?
No, I think you stick with what you got. I think it's good. I think you should write your own version, the new International Sam version.
The NIS. The NISV.
Yeah, there's sometimes I'll talk to people who are like kind of get frustrated with different Bible versions and different translations. Like, well, what does it say? Like, what does the original language say? Um, and the nature of translation is so tricky and so nuanced and so poetic. It's not like, there is a Hebrew word for dog and there is an English word for dog. And so you can directly translate that. But also at the same time, dogs, 3,000 years ago are very different than dogs today. Like, I got a dog who's literally living in my house right now. And that, so even the idea of dog is so different. Let alone the structures of sentences, and Hebrew itself is such a um, um, like Greek has a lot of very particular rules, and Greek is much more like a math. Like when you're translating Greek, you're really doing math. When you're translating Hebrew, you're doing poetry because it's loose and you don't know exactly what word is referring back to which other word, and so um, it's probably good for us to not get stuck in particular versions for too long because it probably keeps us on our toes a little bit.
Yeah, that was a good word.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, this is the things we think about as pastors.
Mm-hmm.
What version do we use? Sometimes what I'll do is just this past was it Sunday? I read from the New Living Translation
Yeah.
of Psalm 22. And I did that because I like the way the New Living Translation is translated, not for accuracy, but because of readability and speakability.
Mm-hmm.
So it just flows really nice. It sounds like the New Living Translation (NLT). It's like how you would talk,
Yeah.
and so when you read it publicly, it just flows really nice. Or sometimes like the ESV, which is more of like a word for word literal translation, can feel kind of like
Mm-hmm.
stilted, or it can feel kind of like it doesn't flow. It doesn't sound really nice.
Right.
So
Right.
that's yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I tend to do more studying out of the ESV.
Yeah, I saw a big ESV on your desk.
Yeah, I got a big study Bible. I love my ESV study Bible. It's
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
And just because they're doing less, um, um, they're not trying hard to make it roll off the tongue to make the phraseology work. They're trying to do as strict a translation as they can, which is great for research.
It
But
is.
then, yeah, you're not really a fan of the message, are you?
No. Well, I like it actually. I like it when it comes to like the New Testament letters.
Hmm.
I think it works really well because sometimes Paul's arguments can be hard to follow, and the way that Eugene Peterson translates some of the New Testament, it just makes it a lot more plain and easy to
Hmm.
understand. But when it
Hmm.
comes to poetry, I don't like how he translated some things.
Interesting.
Like there's that one verse, "Your word is a lamp unto my feet." I forget what psalm that comes from, but he translated lamp to flashlight.
Oh.
And it's like, your word is a flashlight to my feet. And it's like, not that there's something more romantic about a lamp, but there is something more romantic about a lamp. And it's like, flashlight, I think of
It
something
is.
plastic, I think of something throwaway. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, like that's, I get it. It's the same idea. It's more of a modern
Hmm.
interpretation. And
Hmm.
maybe that's appropriate, but I think you lost something of a little poetry there.
I totally agree. Yeah. I like the message a lot. I think he's really on the other end of the ESV. Like he's even doing some theology as he writes that,
Yes.
um, pretty unapologetically, I think.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. We all do theology constantly
Mhm.
as we read scripture, like we just do. And so Eugene Peterson is like, I'm going to write mine down. Here you go.
That's great. Well, Stefan, we could talk more and more. I hope we didn't bore anyone with our Bible translation talk.
Are you kidding me? This is thrilling.
We should make that a segment
Who
on
could
the
possibly be
podcast.
bored by that?
We should make it a segment on the podcast called, um, we got to give it a fun name. Translate this.
Things for normal people.
Yeah. Translate this.
Oh, there you go. I like that.
Well, folks, I think we're not talking about Psalm 19 anymore.
Nope. We quit.
So, thanks for listening. Thanks for participating. And we are going to say goodbye now and link some songs in the show notes. See you next week.
See ya.